Well, thank you, Theresa Lubowitz, for coming back to the podcast. I didn't think I'd have you on this early from when we last had you on, yet fate decided otherwise. So thank you very much for coming back on the morning after the Ontario 2025 election. Thank you very much for coming back on.
Yeah, of course, happy to be here. And I mean, that's the nature of snap elections, right?
Yeah, well, we can let's start off there. I find the idea of this idea of it's a snap election, kind of a misnomer. We had on Sabrina Nanji of the
Yep.
Queens Park Observer. I'm going to say almost a year ago, and there was a rumor floating around that we're
Yeah.
going to be going to an early 2025 election. Doug Ford was itching to go for his superstition regarding, the Ontario wants the opposite party at
Yeah.
Queens Park as what's
I, I would
in
argue and did argue that it was a sure thing as of last summer for sure. So
right. Like everybody knew we were going. So this
yeah.
idea like snap election, I'm like, no, you had almost a year to get
Yeah.
your, get your bank accounts full of money,
Yeah.
to get your candidates in place, to get your
Yeah.
teams trained up, ready to go. What's your GOT? What's your messaging going? Like, I'm a little flabbergasted at the. I know you and I come from a liberal party point of view, but I am going to throw the NDP in here as well
Yeah.
at just how like, oh my gosh, it was a snap election. We had no idea. I'm like, no, there is really no excuse for the performance that I think we saw last night.
Yeah.
You say something now. I'm done talking.
So I have a lot of thoughts. One, I think I know where these campaigns will spin things. We saw a little bit of it last night in the speeches. Um, for Crombie's team, I think they will claim it a success because they have official party status. Now, it's an open question whether Doug Ford will raise that again, totally within
Hmm.
his power to do so, and
Hmm.
he did last time. So I don't know that you can tick that box off as a winner yet. I think they will say, we added 500,000 votes to the party's vote base during this election. So that's a big deal. And if you look at, her first time out compared to Kathleen Wynne's first time out or Dalton McGuinty's, it's not that far off from there. And it's much better than Stephen Del Duca's. And with that goes, a higher vote share as well. Open question, however, whether, that's a Trudeau resignation bump. We saw that rise happening over the same time. Bonnie had a slight rise throughout the campaign, nothing significant, nothing to suggest that she was catching fire personally.
Hmm.
Another victory they'll talk about is you've added 4 or 5, however the numbers shake out in the end, new caucus members for the Liberal Party, which is, almost doubling the seats. And anytime you say, oh, we almost doubled, like that's an exciting thing. Usually if you're in the NDP, not so much if you're in the Liberals and you're sitting at 8 seats beforehand. The problem for them on that front will be that almost none of those candidates were recruited by Bonnie Crombie. Most of them were recruited by Stephen Del Duca or are longtime members of the party like Robin Ajax or John in Don Valley North. So the exception being Stephanie Smythe, my new Liberal MPP. So
Hmm.
yay, my writing, we actually did something. But having said that, she was recruited at the very last minute to the point that they actually asked me if I was interested in running.
Oh,
Spoiler,
really?
never run. But
Wow.
she is a star candidate. She did an amazing job on the trail. But again, I don't know that you can suggest that Bonnie is the reason that she won this election in this riding.
Hmm.
So, there's all those points that they can make, and I don't think any of them are terribly valid. But the biggest point working against them is that when she ran for leader, her campaign team suggested this was going to be a cakewalk. She would easily defeat Doug Ford. She was the person they were most afraid of being the
Right.
Liberal leader. And so, by their own metrics that they set during the leadership race, this is an abject failure.
Hmm.
And if you're going to go on their metrics, she should absolutely have resigned last night. Now, on the NDP,
Okay, that's
we can break if you
well,
want.
I want to put a pin in that because I think that is the big story is what happens with the
It
Liberals.
is.
But I do want to give attention to the NDP and I'm looking at Ontario elections final tally.
Yep.
I know there's a few ridings that are probably going to be going to recounts just because they're so close. There's a lot of close uh, uh, ridings this time around. I find that's a interesting thing, but I don't think that's going to really change the shape of the next 4 years too much. However, I'm looking at the vote count, right? And the Ontario Liberal Party got 1,500,000. Let's just go 1,500,000 votes. The
Yeah,
NDP only
yeah,
931,000, under a million votes for
yeah,
the NDP. And I know Marit Stiles is walking around like I won, I'm a winner. And I think you and I would look at this and say this is a sign of just how flawed the first past the post system
yeah.
is. I'm like, how does Merit Style say I have the voice of the progressive opposition in Queens Park, and it's clear. Well, no, but more people wanted a Ontario Liberal Party choice. Now, yes, the math works out. Yes, that's a technicality, but this, and even like the percentage of vote, right? Only less than 20% of the electorate said, "I want you there."
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think two things. One, vote productivity is something that we talk about in every election
mhm,
because, as a liberal, I'm always very frustrated with, in past campaigns when we said, "Oh, our vote is so productive, like we just eke out wins." I'm like, you shouldn't want to just eke out wins. You should be trying to grow between elections.
right,
And, I think, part of the liberals having such a big vote tally, but such a poor seat count speaks to bad on the ground organization. And we can talk about that separately. For
yep,
the NDP, I think it speaks to, I've talked to some people inside the NDP, and the general sense I get is that they absolutely love Merit, and I actually think she's their most likable leader in a generation, and I wouldn't can her at all. But it does speak to then what else do you change? And I think you have to start thinking about changing the team or changing the message or changing the plan. And I think they actually had some decent policies this time out. I think their message was really muddled and I didn't really know what they were saying besides on your side, which is meaningless to most voters.
right.
Um, but I also get the sense that the NDP team is generally the same people year in, year out. And you don't get a lot of new thinking. You don't get a lot of breakthroughs when you don't have new thinking. So
Right.
to me, their project has to be how do we get a really compelling message and who do we put in place to make sure that happens? Because I think they do have something to work with in terms of their leader.
I want to throw something by you and tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm foolish, but I'm out in the GTHA. I'm out near Burlington, so I'm
Yeah.
looking at Hamilton is like NDP country,
Yeah.
right? It should be like an NDP stronghold, and usually
Yeah.
it goes back and forth between the Liberals and the NDP.
Yeah.
Sarah Jama in Hamilton Center. Uh, I was kind of keeping an eye on that because I want to know what was going to happen there.
Yeah.
I know for a fact she had a lot of support. There were a lot of old NDP politicos, especially at the municipal level, who were throwing their support behind Sarah Jama. They thought what was done to her by
I think the federal MP did as well.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
and there was a thought that she's going to win this as an independent in Hamilton Center and completely upend things. The fact that she didn't, she it was a decisive blow
Us.
against
Yeah.
her. And it's like there's no quivering around it. It's clear Ontario, or sorry, Hamilton Center did not want her as their
It
MP.
is clear. And with Haldeman and Norfolk nearby, you can also see like that didn't necessarily have to be the case, that an independent can win.
Well, we can touch on that because I do have insight on that. um, but the other issue was Jill Andrews in St. Paul's. You're riding,
Yeah.
and maybe you can. It's the that social justice aspect of the NDP. There are two camps in the NDP. One is like your union, trade union,
Yeah.
economic issues, right? Bread and butter, kitchen table issues. How do we
Old
get
school, more conservative
right?
union type NDP, and then the more downtown liberal,
The social justice,
granola, social justice, whatever.
right? And I
Yeah.
thought that kind of with that in the last iteration of the legislature, that was being
Yeah.
fisticuffs in the NDP.
Yeah.
Do you think that this election has, I'm not going to say killed off, but definitely silenced that social justice section of the NDP? That maybe the NDP going forward, how there's a renewed mandate of like we need to talk to the strengthen our union ties, talk about kitchen table issues, economic issues, job security, job training, all that stuff. is that, could we, is the NDP going to start diving more into that as a
So,
as a
so
messaging going
what
forward?
I saw from some NDP commentators was that that was the plan for this election, was to
Mhm.
lean into sort of working class populism, sort of more ignoring the intersectional side, very much like a Bernie Sanders style campaign where it's
Right,
all
right,
about economic fairness and nothing else. We don't talk
right.
about the other aspects of fairness. And that's what they said from the outset they were going to do. I don't think their policies reflected that. I think there was a lot
Hmm.
of social justice issues in there, attacking poverty, attacking affordability. Um, so I think there was an issue there where they were sort of split. Their support is always split because that sort of more conservative union side of the party plays really well in the north and the southwest, and it doesn't play so well necessarily in London, Ottawa, Toronto, those kinds of bigger communities. So they always have that problem. I don't think they're actually going to solve that problem. I don't think they actually really landed on an answer here. It was, and part of it too was that meant they spent a lot of Ford's last term just fighting about that and not actually
Right.
presenting a really good opposition alternative. I do think voters, they saw the NDP in opposition twice and achieved nothing, which is what's going to happen when you have this sort of winner takes all system. And I think maybe that was part of the reason why voters started to look elsewhere. I think there are strategic voters who really just thought, this is who's leading in my riding. The NDP is basically nowhere in the GTA, probably never will be. The only way they're going to win an election is to make inroads in the GTA. They started to do that a bit with Brampton in 2018 and then fell back towards Ford. What I actually think is happening to them is what happened to the Liberals post 2014, and even maybe a little bit before that, which is the Liberals started to lose that sort of working class union type voter, which
Hmm.
had also been their bread and butter before. This was a group that the Conservatives have ignored forever. And then you start to see under Monty McNaughton as the labor minister, under Ford as the premier, under Polyev as the federal leader, they're starting to think, hey, these people actually have similar values to us on things. Maybe we should actually be going after them. So that's why you see that crunch in London, Windsor, and Niagara. It's very, very pronounced. We're seeing some of it in the north, like the last election with Timmins going, away from the NDP.
Hmm.
Like that's a shocking result. And the PCs have held on to that, and Ford has held on to that. And that's why pretty much most of his announcements during the campaign were just labor union endorsements. And they're all related to fields where it's going to be construction and it's going to be doing his tunnels and stuff. And there's a
Yeah.
sort of quid pro quo going on there. But there's a big swing happening in the electorate that I think it'll be hard for the NDP to win back if that's the only thing they focus on.
Folks, you mean like the social justice aspect, or
No, the opposite. I think that if they're all in only on the sort of conservative wing of their party, Doug Ford is going to eat their lunch because people always go for the real thing first.
right? Um, well, I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. After 2014, or the the NDP will never form government in this province, um, unless something drastically changes, leadership or just a drastic realignment
I,
somehow in
I
the
I
electorate.
think if they were to, the Liberal Party would have to not exist. Or, there could be a world where the PCs don't have a great leader. That's, if Doug Ford decides he doesn't
Mhm.
want to be premier forever, as he said. There are some possibilities there. I think the biggest challenge for the NDP is they want to focus on affordability and how people are struggling. But all that, in my mind, reminds people of is the last time the NDP were in government and how things
Right,
were really, really bad. So without a bit of an aspirational message about growth and getting ahead, finally, like on your side is not enough. It needs to be
right.
about you getting ahead. And they haven't put out that message because they do want to focus about how you can't afford your rent and all those things. So I think there's a problem even just in the messaging in terms of getting them over that hump.
Well, not only that, but the one thing that I thought was a little ridiculous was Marit Stiles starts off the campaign by saying, we're going to put all the truck traffic on the 407. And immediately people were like, said, but it's a
Yeah.
privately run highway. Like, are we going to, and then it's like, are you buying it? Are you going to buy it back? Okay. Well, how many billions of dollars is that? Like, that's another highway underneath the 401, right? To buy that or to cancel that contract or whatever. And they never addressed that, right? And I think
I
that
think the bigger issue with launching with that is you had your whole progressive wing of the NDP, which is functionally who still supports them, go, what the hell are you talking about? Like,
right,
you're just giving into Doug Ford's frame about congestion from the beginning, which is how he's getting rid of our bike lanes. It's
right,
how he's ignoring all these other priorities. He's like, we got to build on all these projects that, the Ontario line is why there's a lot of congestion downtown. He's not going to talk about that. He's going to blame bike lanes. And here you have the NDP leader on the start of the campaign leaning into his frame about the
right.
campaign and about the state of the province and why things are the way they are. And I just think like it's deeply unstrategic to do that.
Okay. Um, yeah, we could go on for days on this. Let's move on to the real reason why I think we all want to hear is the Liberal Party. I do not see how last night's results could be defended as any kind of a win.
Yep.
Um, right now, I go online to kind of people talking about. Bonnie's defenders are claiming, well, the popular vote increased now to just shy of 30% of the popular vote, and they're now back into official party status. However, you just pointed out, I mean, Doug Ford say official party status is now 15 seats.
That's what I'm expecting at minimum, but yeah.
Right. And there's nothing to stop that from. I mean, yeah, it'll be
I will
crass and
say the only thing
opportunistic.
stopping that from happening is Doug Ford really does want a functional Liberal Party to stop the NDP from growing. He doesn't want to face a united opposition in any way, right? So
Right.
that's why he kept the per vote subsidy. It was supposed to expire at the end of 2024. He kept that going so that the Liberals could stay afloat. And he's quite happy to see them split the vote together. So I could see him giving them party status just so that they can do the research they need to take out the NDP.
Well, the other aspect I'm wondering about is, I mean, the clear fact is the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party does not have a seat.
It's the biggest problem, yeah.
And I've been wrapping. I kind of went to bed and I was wrapping my head around like, how can this go? And my take on it, and you can tell
You,
me if
you
I'm
can call it the John Tory problem, right? This is the John Tory post 2007 problem.
well. There's that. Like, let's be honest here. She can't ask questions in the legislature. She can't get those sound bites in. She can't try and direct the narrative in any shape, way, or form. The the most humiliating thing is if she wants to go into the into Queen's Park, she has to have one of her members sign her in.
Yep.
That like, I'm just like, there's that. But then I'm also thinking in my head, okay, who does she speak for? Like, where's the Liberal Party base when last time I had you on, she was promising I'm going to deliver Mississauga, I'm going to deliver Peel, Brampton, and Mississauga, the
Yep.
905. I know all these communities. I
Yep.
can deliver them to you. She's failed spectacularly on this front. She doesn't even hold a seat. There are no liberals in the 905.
Yep.
Um, I,
In
I'm I'm trying to think like
in my mind, like part of the electability argument that her team put forward was about, her running up the totals in Mississauga, which I think was always a bit of a bad argument anyway, because that's a little bit of a different reality. She was a McCallion endorsed,
yeah,
follower, and that was always going to happen. And then once she was there, she was going to keep winning. So who cares about that? The argument that she was going to win Peel, specifically all the seats in Mississauga, I think not even winning her own is a huge indictment of that. But then the other part was, I'm a firm believer that you have to win the 905,
yeah,
specifically, the run up along Yonge Street all the way up to Newark and Aurora, to actually form government. And she got nothing there. So to me, that's an enormous problem because that means you're just not an attractive prospect to those voters. I think the other part too is she was seen amongst all the candidates running for Liberal leader as sort of like the economic choice. And then she promptly did not run an economic campaign
yes,
during a time when we were in an economic crisis nationally. It made absolutely no sense. I know I've railed on this on every day of the campaign that where's the economic message and like people are sick of me talking about it. But like to me, that was the fundamental thing that this sort of, fiscally conservative type of candidate should be able to say on a campaign, and she did at no point during the campaign.
That
Like
I mean,
she did have her tax cuts, which she announced in advance, and then she promptly, I know the focus was on healthcare so that they could come in second. Like, privately, they have always talked about how their plan was actually to have a two campaign strategy, and the focus on healthcare would bring their progressives to them, and then they would win over the conservatives in the second time. But that absolutely didn't happen either, because I don't think people took her that seriously on more social
mhm.
issues, and there was no economic message. The other part too is like Doug Ford has a terrible economic record, just absolutely brutal in terms of job losses, in terms of industries dying out, in terms of ballooning debt, like all of these things. He's terrible on every measure, and there's no conversation about it. And do I think you can do that in 30 days of a campaign? No, but they didn't. They basically, it seemed like they, on a message track, were doing nothing since she got elected leader.
Okay, let's.
Sorry, there's my rant. There's a lot to unpack.
But it's kind of okay. You're right, because she got. I'm flashing back a year ago. She gets elected. It seems like a lifetime, but she got elected as the new Liberal leader. And you're right. She came in as I remember speaking with her on the podcast when she was mayor. It's like, we're going to run as a right of center alternative to Doug Ford. Basically, it's Doug Ford without the scandals.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, I'm interested to see how that resonates with the
Well, especially
populace.
because when you run as, a knockoff of something, people usually cheer the real thing.
Right,
So
right. Um, but she comes out, she gets a little bit of a bump in the polls,
yeah,
a little bit of a honeymoon, and then disappears.
yeah.
And I'm sitting going like, where is Bonnie Crombie? And she shows up for a scrum every now and again. She likes the press conference bit, but I was like, every chance she had a chance to step up to the microphone and say, this is the priorities of Ontarians. This is what I want to do. She just shied away from it.
So this goes
Well,
to
I just want to say, like, for the life of me, I never understood why she did not run in Milton during that by-election. And I know she might have lost. However, I also think you're the third place party. You need to have a little bit of gumption. You need to be willing to say, I'm going to punch Doug Ford in the nose,
yeah.
and I'm going to fight. I'm fighting for this seat because I'm fighting for you, and and you need to prove to your party, one, I can win. Two, you need to prove to Ontario you can win. And you
So
kind of have to put a little bit of fear into Doug Ford and say, oh man,
So on that, I will say, like, historically, the only example I can think of a leader running way outside their community and winning is Jagmeet Singh. And I'm trying to think of like anyone else, and they usually lose when they do it. I will say, asking somebody who's been mayor of a town for a decade to run in an adjacent community, it's just a non-starter. Like, I remember this with Stephen Del Duca too. Like, they are not going to. They are of that community. It's the only place they're going to represent. You're just not going to convince them of that. So fine, whatever. And I actually didn't think it was a problem for her to not be in the House in the lead up to this campaign, because nothing happens in the House. Doug Ford never shows up there. I do think it's a huge problem to not win your seat and then be in there for, the rebuild. So, there is that element of it. In terms of, you know, the people who maybe want her to stay on, my question for them is like, what is the improvement plan, both in terms of her
right.
and staff? Because if I look at her debate performance during the leadership race, she was very shaky and always looked at her notes. If I look at her debate performance during this election, she was very shaky and always looked at her notes. I see zero improvement on her ability there. We see what she was like in scrums after announcements, where she looked like a deer in headlights half the time. And that just does, to me, it does not, like,
Well, do you remember her
generate
campaign?
any kind of confidence in her
You remember
as
the campaign launch
yeah,
they did that up in Barrie,
the
and,
has, my God.
and they had after saying how stupid was the Canada's not for sale, which was genius on Doug Ford's part, in my
Yeah,
opinion. But say, oh, they're stupid. But then you come on, you're holding onto your hat for dear life
yeah.
in sub-zero temperature, and I was like, I didn't listen to it because I want to see the visual of it.
Yes, the visual every time.
And I was sitting there going, this is a disaster. This, like, where are the hundreds of supporters behind you? Where's your team,
So this is the
Team Bonnie supporting?
main thing, right? Like, I at every campaign stop and in most of the base, I know they clipped well in a few parts, but for anyone actually watching it, which I know is mostly no one, anytime you watched her performance, it didn't seem like it was a net gain for the party. Like, I don't think she was adding anything personally. So that's a problem. And then you look at the team that she surrounded herself with. So
Hmm.
you were talking about how nothing happened for a long time. And that's very much true. Like, there was just nothing happening because her team was working off the side of their desk. The complaint I was making internally was, you need to actually pay people money to work full time on this campaign so that they can then enable volunteers across the province to actually get stuff done. There were enormous bottlenecks inside the campaign because that didn't happen. And even once the per vote subsidy was guaranteed, which allowed the party to then go get bank loans for the campaign, you should have been paying people from that point on, which we knew, November, December. You had at least a couple months where you could have been fully ramping up to be ready for that campaign, and that didn't happen. So there's just a lot of strategic choices not happening there. Then there's the candidate search process where nothing was going on with that for the longest time. People who
Right.
probably should have been greenlit really early just have to sit around waiting. They're always in search of star candidates, but then aren't doing the grunt work on these other fronts. And, we also saw, like, was there any kind of review of the candidates who were
Well,
picked?
I was going to say the candidate in Oshawa or Durham.
Yes.
Um, that I mean that I would you and I
And
have
then
worked.
and then the lack of disavowing that candidate.
Well,
Because we could have,
that's just it. Like you and I have worked on campaigns, different ones, but
yeah,
they are tight run ships, and the nomination process leading up, stuff like that is caught, and you're that candidate we told, you can't we can't have our leader defending these comments at any point during the
no,
campaign
it
because
has to be not our candidate.
we found it, they'll find it.
Yep.
We can't allow this to happen. I'm sorry. Um, you're not going to get greenlit.
Yep.
Um, and that you're right. And then the fact that they're released and it's just no. I'm sitting on it for a week. I was flabbergasted. Like this,
It's
how
it's
is
just it shows a lack of leadership in her team and in her for not
right,
immediately canning those candidates. It's also just, we do this thing in Ontario politics where we're like, and Doug Ford was egging them on. He's like, "Oh, I have all my
right,
candidates. What's wrong with these guys?" And like, okay, number one, I do get that trying to get candidates who, in many cases, have to leave their jobs
right.
during this race, need to get clearances from their work, whatever. A lot of candidates actually can't announce until the writ is dropped. So I get that. And when it's, a so-called snap election and people aren't sure the exact moment that it's going to happen, it is very difficult to get some people to be able to step away. We
Right.
see a lot of this in the medical field, actually. So, I understand all of that problem. But having said that, like, why are we even trying to field candidates in every riding to show that, we're a serious party? Well, I don't know that any of the results show that we're a serious party. And in some cases, Perry Sound, Muskoka, we're actually allowing a conservative to be elected because we refuse to get out of the way for other progressive parties where we don't have a chance. And in some cases, like Oshawa, where we have both a bad candidate and we're really should be trying to keep the NDP there to prevent Doug Ford from
Hmm.
picking up a seat, we're like, no, let's put a terrible candidate in and then not disavow them and try and split the vote for no reason.
I I'll push back a bit on. I understand where you're coming from. I I believe that like every party should run every candidate. The Liberal Party has proven they can win majorities in Ontario.
And they
Um,
do need rural ridings to do that. Like we have seen that with,
right.
Bay of Quinte area in the past. Some places in the Southwest, like we have never won a majority without getting some rural seats. And I'm not suggesting that we, not
But
compete
that
at places and that there aren't liberal voters in every riding because there are. But I think at this point, we have a lot of progressive voters in this province who are seeing vote splitting and want the parties to cooperate. Well, that's never going to happen because the parties actually do hate each other and so do
yes.
the organizers in many cases. So that's not going to happen. But maybe there could be a strategic d'entente like set up where we say, you know what, maybe we aren't going to run in that riding where we obviously have zero chance. Like I'm looking at, Mushkegowuk, James Bay, which is, Moosonee area where I was born. And the NDP is currently holding on by 4 votes.
Right. Right.
And the Liberals basically did nothing there, and same with the Greens. And is that a riding? I'm also just thinking the Indigenous communities there and how Doug Ford has treated those communities as he talks about the Ring and Fire, like absolutely terrible. And is it the progressive thing to do to run somebody there? I don't know.
I that I think is a question we will be perplexed about for the next 4 years. Um, I'm of the mindset of no, run your team, run a candidate in every riding, and sell yourself to the Ontario people as I got what it takes to fix the problems of the province and bring us to prosperity over the next 4 years. Um,
Whereas I think, despite having worked for a political party and its headquarters and been in
yeah,
4 campaigns at Central, I just don't care about political parties. I care about doing better things for the province. And I think we care too much about ourselves when we make these decisions.
that I get that as well. I understand that maybe it is a time for a new dynamic in Ontario politics. I personally think, uh, we need to have a serious talk about the way we elect uh, our governments. The first past the post does not work. I think I'm
It
prefer.
doesn't. But the problem with that, of course, is as soon as somebody wins an election, they go, oh, well, I won under that
Oh
system.
no,
I'm going to change it.
I understand that. I mean,
So this is
we look at what
the
happened.
eternal
We look
problem.
at what happened federally, and Justin Trudeau promised change that never came, and that was his first promise broken to Canadians.
Well, but I mean, even there, like he was never going to bring in mixed member or anything like that. Like that wasn't
Well,
his.
that's just it. But I guess we're getting into the weeds, and it's not going to change in the next 4 years. Obviously, Doug Ford's
No,
not
Doug Ford
doing
is
that.
not going to be bringing that
No,
change.
I want
So,
to
so
kind of
that's the broader point. Like, if we know that is the case, like, what are we doing to actually get rid of Doug Ford? Like, my thing is like, during the campaign, I called for, in the Niagara area and some other places for people to vote for the NDP because these
Mhm.
seats were in danger. And I took a lot of flack from liberals on that front. And then when I was calling for liberals to win in GTA, I was taking all this flack from the NDP as if I hadn't just told them,
Right.
vote for them there.
Well, but like,
And I totally understand when you're a political party, when you're a leader, like this was the complaint about Wynne that she didn't endorse the NDP in 2018. Well, yes, she's the liberal of the leader party who nominated candidates in all these ridings. She actually can't just say screw them in the middle of an election. You have to do that work before the election to decide if you're going to do any kinds of these deals. We have seen it federally, with Stéphane Dion and Elizabeth May when they decided not to run each
right,
other's ridings. So there is precedence for this, but you have to make those decisions in advance. So one, voters know that it's happening.
right.
And two, so you're not actually just screwing over your own people in the riding during a live election.
That being said, um, I want to get into a bit of like what's the path forward, because I look at the NDP and I'm not seeing a lot of paths forward for growth. Like I
Yeah.
don't see, and by growth I
I see no
mean
path forward currently for them.
I don't. I think they're like this is the best that they're going to get.
Like,
Right.
let's be honest, 2018, they didn't take a single seat from the PCs. Actually, all the opposition parties combined in 2018 and 2022, I haven't looked at it this time, they gained exactly 1 seat away from the Conservatives. So they
Mhm.
were eating each other's lunch if they got any kind of seat share growth
Right.
during those two elections. So, the progressive parties are often not very honest about this to each other. They all say, oh, like you only take from us and we
Right.
only take
Right.
from the PCs. It's just simply not true. None of them do anything. But having said that, like if you're gonna have growth, the NDP's entire growth in 2018 was at the expense of the Liberals. So I don't know where they're going to be beating the PCs. They had in Peel previously. I don't see that happening under, say,
Well,
something like Bonnie Crombie.
that's just, and again, that's kind of my point is political. You and I both know political parties are coalition machines.
Yeah,
You go out and you find your groups of people, and you build your commonalities and you build your people.
yeah.
Doug Ford has done that spectacularly in this province, I believe. He has got everyone from trade unions, which I am still flabbergasted that he had like Unifor coming out and endorsing him, and Leuna and all these trade unions saying he's the way forward to help preserve manufacturing jobs in this province. But he's also he has parents. Like he has parents, and he has the business community on board. There are grassroots people that legitimately say, "You're our guy, Doug." And now,
There's even people, I saw people say, I don't like Doug Ford, but I like how he has stood up to Trump,
right,
which we can, open
that
question,
I'm
given
not gonna.
Starlink still exists and all that stuff. But like there are people who in his day-to-day performance see something that they like.
Right,
And so this is my biggest thing for all the opposition parties. And it's been my big complaint over multiple campaigns, which is that you win elections two ways. You do it, well, three ways technically. You do it by offering a good positive plan because people do need something to vote for. You also do it by upping the negatives of your opponent. And you also do it by lowering the strengths of your opponent. And that third piece is something that none of the opposition parties have done throughout this whole time Doug has been running for leader. They talk about, his personality issues. Well, people seem to be fine with him. And if they were going to change their mind, it would have been 3 elections ago, not,
Yeah.
now. They're very used to him. They think they know who he is. That's not going to be the thing that moves them. So then you can talk about his record. But people seem fine with that. And they also don't really know that much about it. And they don't dig that deep into those things. So that's probably not going to dislodge them at this point. Like with all the scandals he's had, it would have
Well,
happened already. So the
I mean,
third piece is he has a lot of strengths that actually can be
mhm,
decreased if you actually go after them. And in the 2022 campaign, I've told you this, I was told, oh no, he's too popular. We can't attack him. It's like, well, how do you think you're going to win an election?
right.
You actually have to bring down his positives.
The yeah, and I guess I have a million thoughts running through my head at the moment, so I'm trying to put them all together. I see where you're coming at, and my thoughts on the matter are, I guess, like, what is the path forward for, like, we agree the NDP don't really have a path forward. I'm wondering what the path forward for the Liberals are, and because the Liberals have always done a good job of trying to find those that coalition, right? Whether you get teachers or nurses to come on board, trade union endorsements, small businesses, whatever the case may be. The Liberals' success in the past was always when you find those coalitions and you bring them together. This time around, I was amazed at how that work was not done, especially after Bonnie Crombie said,
Yeah.
"No, I can't run in Milton because I have to go out and I have to talk to Ontarians. I have to get to know them." And it's clear you didn't do that. I don't know who the fuck you were talking to, because
I
clearly,
will say, from what I could see, they did do a lot of legwork with the teachers unions. There was a lot, like that was something that was broken during the
yeah,
Dalton McGuinty days, as you recall, because you were around.
yes, yeah.
And that was a relationship that was very, very badly harmed during those times and has not really been built back up. So I know that they spent a lot of time focused on that relationship. And then nurses and doctors, obviously, was another area. However, that left out a ton of the province just focusing in those two areas.
Well, but going on the nurses and doctors part, I'm going to kind of push back. I didn't see any big nurses union endorsements. I didn't see any big campaign from the nurses. As well, I didn't see any campaigns from the OMA, from doctors saying, yeah, Bonnie's going to fix hallway medicine, especially considering Bonnie came out saying this is what the campaign's going to be about. It's going to be about healthcare, which I think that's a horrible. It's important to Ontarians, but it's always next week's problem. It's
I, I
never
think I
it's never
think
immediate.
getting Rose Zacharias to run in Barrie was sort of the big thing. In terms of the OMA, her being a former head of that organization.
Okay,
I don't
but
know that they dragged that through at all through the rest of the campaign.
I didn't see anything. I was astounded at how they wanted to make this about healthcare. They wanted to make this a campaign about healthcare, and they so failed to do it, because I was like, then where are the doctors coming out to say,
Well, so here's
are the
here's the
nurses and all that,
Here's the
especially
thing,
the
like
nurses?
if you're gonna make this campaign about healthcare, what you do is you start with that on day one, which they did. But you say, okay, here's our entire healthcare platform, which they had released before the election. So you take all of that, and then every single day for the first 10 days, you talk about a specific plank of it. They immediately moved off of it the next day.
Right,
So it's not a healthcare election if you're not talking about it for the first half of the campaign, like just exclusively talking about that. You can talk about the other things you're doing. You can even make an ODSB announcement and talk about how that impacts healthcare. There
right.
are things that you can do, but they didn't make the campaign about that. And they were so certain that they were going to be able to change the ballot question, despite the fact that internationally, the ballot question is that Trump is coming for all of us. So, like
Right.
that was never going to be the ballot question, and not making that pivot as it was happening live and trying to stick to messaging that was planned 6 months ago was just a huge mistake. And they didn't even do that properly because, they were trying to do an announcement a day and cover all their bases.
Right.
Don't do that. Focus on the thing you say you're focusing on and then do a platform at the end.
I was astounded at, even when they came out and they said, I remember John Fraser saying this campaign is going to be about healthcare, and I kind of said, no, it's not.
That
I
was my
know.
thought too.
My reasoning for this was, yeah, people complain that healthcare isn't working. Like, we do have real issues with it, and I don't want to mind that
Yeah.
principle. However, I've always thought healthcare is one of those things of it's next week's problem. You want your hospital to be working when you have to go there, but you
Yeah.
never want to go there. So unless you have a family member directly in the system and
Even
getting
then,
screwed over,
even
it's
then, like what I say about this issue, which I think is true about most issues, is I think voters are fundamentally conservative, not in terms of the policies they care about, but in terms of needing to personally experience something to care about it. I do
right,
think that is true of the bulk of voters. There are other voters who, can sort of see beyond their own experiences, understand why things are a problem and should be addressed,
right,
even if it doesn't affect them. I think those voters tend to be more progressive and vote for, the Liberals and the NDP already, so you're not winning them over.
right,
But I do think on healthcare, like, I'm somebody who has a number of health issues. I have allergies. Like, I need my hospital emergency to be open all the time because I could be going at any moment.
right,
Most people, that's not the case for them. So then people say, well, what about long-term care? Sandwich generation, people's parents are, I'm like, yeah, well, we saw 4,000 people die in long-term care and nothing
right.
happened with it, right? And we heard about the conditions from the literal army and nothing happened with it. So we know people don't actually care about that in any way that's going to move them at the polling station. And if it did, they would have already been with us anyway. So you're not getting people there. So then family doctors, that was the big thing. We're going to talk about family doctors, family doctors. And this is something I've been railing about for a few years because I saw, a handful of years ago that it was 1 in 5 doctors were going to be retiring in the next 5 years, and this is going to be a huge problem. The other side of that is that we have a lot of nurses retiring. The average age, I think, for a nurse was like 55, and many of the nursing instructors were aging out as well. So who's going to train this next group of nurses, right? Huge crisis in healthcare, not just happening here, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in other places. But, this is a big issue that's happening. But again, a lot of people don't actually go to their family doctor. They might go to a clinic if they need something, but in most cases, they're not even going to the doctor annually. And specifically, young men, like I remember this from my time in politics, that young men do not want to seek medical care.
Hmm.
And what is the largest group of people backing Doug Ford? Well, it's young men because they don't actually care about this issue. So, given all those different pieces, it's not that surprising to me that people who healthcare is not top of mind every day, every week, every month, every quarter, even every year, are not going to, the polls kept saying this is the top issue of the campaign, but that's not what ended up being the case. The
No.
economy, your job, your fiscal well-being, that's something
Well,
you think about every single day and is in
I
front of you every single day.
you're right, and healthcare is one of those like default check marks when you go to a person and say, "What's your top issue of the day?" Healthcare is always going to be in the top three. It's
Yeah.
usually economy, education, healthcare, only because that's kind of like
Even climate, right? Like people
right,
want a healthy environment and they
but
want to
it's never like a
invest in the
top
future,
five,
but it's not going to be the top spot and definitely not if they have to pay for it.
right? Now, my thought was when Bonnie Crombie came out and said healthcare is the issue of this election. I went for a run and I ran through my and I'm gonna this is anecdotal, but I think it's bang on for the state of the province. I went for a run and in my neighborhood, I run through my neighborhood 3 times a week. I ran through my park at
Yeah.
the end of my street, my municipal park, and in that park was a tent encampment.
Yep.
There were 10 people, there was homeless people sleeping in my public park. And that on my neighborhood Facebook group, that's what people were talking, like homeless people in our parks. Like, can I take my kid for a to the playground? Can we use the ball diamond? Like what? Oh my God, what do we do? I said that's the issue of the election. It's the tent encampments. It's and it, by that I mean we aren't getting housing built. There's no rent control or rent to help house these people. There's no and I know you're vocal against the mayors who were asking for the
Human rights to be stripped away. Yes.
yeah well for the notwithstanding clause to be used, and we spoke with Matt Cisco, one of the signatories to that letter on this
Yeah.
podcast.
I have opinions about that, but yeah.
Well, but I don't agree with the drastic measure, but I get it. Like they're like nothing. They can't do anything, and there was just my point was like this was the issue that people wanted to see addressed. Doug Ford was not. It's easy for him to say, "Oh, we'll just go and remove them and put them somewhere else." But I thought Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, to an extent, really missed the ball to take ownership of the situation. Say, this is on you, Doug. This was your failure. You have not built the housing that we've known is needed for the last 6 years. You failed on this. You haven't built housing. You haven't, and this is the result. And to which I look and say that would have been an easy pivot through the Doug with the Donald Trump matter when Donald Trump is starting to tariffs. Like, yeah, how do we combat a 25% tariff when we can't even house our people?
So
Like,
this was my thing, right? So I said from the beginning, so the thing I sent to Bonnie's team like a year ago was that this campaign needs to be about how the middle class dream is evaporating under Doug Ford.
right,
Because on all these different measures, things are objectively worse. And homeless encampments are actually just a symptom of that. And people wanting them to go away, maybe some of that is well intentioned and they actually want to help people. I think a lot of it is I'm very uncomfortable that
oh,
my
absolutely,
middle class reality of my community no longer exists.
absolutely,
Like that's ultimately what that was. And that's why people feel that way. So, my whole thing was you need to make this about his terrible economic record and all the ways that he's harming people. And, they chose not to do that. Fine. The big challenge for all the opposition parties, I actually think, is that Doug Ford has been really good in weaponizing sort of national and international comparators to say, oh, well, it's not really my fault. So something you see a lot of with the healthcare crisis is people responding with, well, it's because there's too many people immigrating here. The population's too high now. So that's why we have no housing. That's why we have bad healthcare. It's not actually Doug's fault. It's Justin's fault or whatever.
right.
Right? Or they'll say like, well, why is this happening everywhere? Because we see like in California, a terrible situation with encampments everywhere. Like I went to San Diego 10 years apart and like it's stark the difference.
Right.
So, this is actually an issue happening everywhere, which we can talk about oligarchs and why this is really happening and all those things. But having
Yes.
said that, these are also things that the opposition could be needling him on and pointing out why that's not true. Like to me, you had to attack him on his economic record, but you had to compare it to the other provinces too and say, why is Ontario with the biggest population, the economic driver of the nation, why are we trailing Saskatchewan?
Right.
Why are we trailing these other provinces in terms of have not status? Like we're have not status now under Doug Ford in equalization.
Right.
We have higher unemployment than these other provinces, despite being the economic engine of the province. Like there's all these different elements where Doug Ford is completely failing people that even by national metrics, he's doing worse than everybody else under Justin Trudeau's economy, right? So like there's a bigger thing
Right.
happening there and they did not draw that out.
I wanted maybe this is something that was kind of sticking in the back of my head, and maybe I'd like to get your input on it because maybe I'm misreading the room here. I always thought you mentioned the oligarchs and we see in the states,
Yeah.
and we have them here in Canada. We have a big issue with
Doug
billionaires.
Ford even says God bless them, right? So
Well, I said, God bless the Weston family, and
yeah.
I always thought about that is okay when the Greenbelt scandal kicked in, and we heard about all the billionaire land developers who are going to be taking part in this. Not once did Marit or Bonnie name the people who were involved, not like name the companies and the owners of these are family owned companies, right?
Yeah.
Name them. Why don't you name the Weston family as he's the Maple healthcare app that is run by the Weston family? Why wouldn't the opposition say he's he's not for you, he's for them, and you had a year to really start to change the narrative of like
Yeah.
this is bad for our economy. Billionaires are bad for the economy. They suck capital out of the economy. They at what point like their concerns are not yours. They're not worried about like, hey, did I pay the hydro bill this week?
Yeah.
That's not their concern. They're bored. Say they don't have to worry about buying anything, literally anything. They can buy planes, mansions, yachts. They can buy anything. So what do? They buy governments.
Even just like it's not even just them too, it's corporations too, right? Like so I saw something yesterday or 2 days ago
Yeah,
about TD. they had a $2 billion profit this year and it's slightly lower than their $2 billion profit last year and like whatever. So I will push back a little bit in that I believe the NDP did mention Galen West by name a number of times when they were talking about the bribe checks that Doug Ford sent out. They did name him saying like, why is a billionaire like Galen West getting
Yeah.
these checks, whatever. I think also the Liberals have tried to talk about Doug Ford sort of special friends who get all these bonuses and stuff. To your point, they don't name them by name. The thing I will say though is I think being close to the US, part of the problem with that for us is we sort of start to get their politics seeping into ours. And it's usually a 2-year delay. We've seen this on trans rights and other issues like that. But it's also on this sort of American dream idea where, all of us are much closer to being homeless than we are to being a billionaire. And yet people don't want caps. Like I think Andrew Horwath once actually put forward a policy about capping incomes and earnings in
Mhm.
Ontario, and that went nowhere because people do not like for you to sort of cap their potential and what they could possibly learn. They're never actually going to reach those numbers or those places,
Oh no,
but people
I
don't like that. And so I think when you start nailing billionaires on things, for a lot of the population, they have to think, well, why shouldn't they have their success? Right. And that is just something that people have like, it's an intrinsic thing in their personal psychology that like people should be able to succeed. And they obviously worked hard to get there. There is a bit of a leakage from the US where wealth equals value and that you've actually deserved whatever you're getting here, even though, there's macroeconomic factors, blah, 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 blah.
everyone got
The
it because
deck being stacked for you if you
daddy
already have
made the
money.
millions and you just
Exactly.
happened to
Inheritance and
reinvest it.
stuff.
Yeah.
And we see this too anytime we try to change like inheritance laws and stuff like that. Like people do not like their potential being capped, even though they're never going to make it there. I see what's why people play the lottery as well, like all these
Right.
things. So I understand your point and I agree with it. I don't know how effective it will be because people just do not see it that way.
I I know, and I was hoping that maybe you said, "Geez, Joel, why haven't you been sitting at the microphone?" And I
Trust
mean,
me, like there's nothing more I would like than to get rid of billionaires. However,
well, personally, I'm like, you can still be a multi-millionaire. Like, there's nothing
right?
wrong with being wealthy and saying, "I've got it good. I worked hard. This is mine. I earned it." I'm like, by all
The
means,
other thing I will say
earn
too
it.
is a point I make regularly, and I remember this during the Keys Matt mayoral campaign because we were talking about taxing a higher property tax rate on homes over $1 million. And, that was a few years ago already. So that would have captured less housing back then. But even people I knew on the campaign who, had pretty nice houses, send their kids to private school were like, oh, that might
Mhm.
actually impact me. And it's like, well, some people have nothing. So yeah, I hope so.
Right.
But, like something I've learned in politics from that experience and also from doing the debt-free tuition program for the Ontario government is that everybody thinks they're middle class. If you're poor, you don't want to be poor. You don't identify that way. If you're middle class, you identify as middle class. If you're rich, you identify middle class because that's somebody else causing those issues, right? So
Right.
everybody identifies a middle class. And if that is the way people think about things, they always think that they're struggling and striving and that they should be able to get that little bit ahead. So anytime you start talking about taxing people even at the higher end, everyone goes, oh, well, I might be there one day. You're never going to be there, but that's how people think.
Yeah. I don't, I'm not, well, like we're talking the problem. I mean, maybe that's the long-term game is that I don't see how the Liberals or the NDP really compete in that dynamic. If that's the public narrative, like, how do you say, like, well, at some point you have to say, no, some people just have too much. Like, there is only so much money going around. It's not like we're just we can't, everyone says you can't just keep printing money.
Yeah.
You're right. However, they have your share of the money and they didn't get it by working hard. They got it because the company that you're working for, they bought it and they said, I don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
I
I,
want the IP. I don't care about the staff. Right. And it's like, let's have an honest discussion about how the economy works. I don't think Bonnie or Merritt were the people to have that conversation. I don't know who is. And I guess
well,
that's my
I do think if Bonnie wasn't going to that conversation, like, what's the point of her leadership, quite frankly? Like,
that's
to me, that's the entire point of her running for office is to have that conversation. And if she's not going to do it, then there's no point of her being there. I do think, those issues are a little macro for people and that people
right.
really want to know in their day to day, like, what are you actually offering me? The other thing I would say too, and I've been saying this at the federal level, is that we are lacking leadership that has like any kind of long-term vision. And I know
Right.
elections are every 4 years and you really get 2 years to actually do something there, blah, 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 and then the 30 days. But at the same time, like we're in an entirely new era of the economy that's coming. Like it's not just AI, it's, climate collapse and the insurance issues that come with that. Like there's a lot happening right now, and we're in an
Mm.
entirely new era and nobody is acting like it. Like this economic system we have been relying on basically since World War II is disappearing. So what are we
Right.
doing to actually address that? Like to me, obviously I'm biased towards basic income. Like where's the conversation about that? Like there are going to be a lot of people in the economy who just will not have work anymore. So what are we doing about that? How are we making sure people contribute in different ways to society, so that we're all better off? Like we are not having these big conversations. We are not being bold about anything. We are not talking
Well,
about the micro conversations about how do I get you through the week kind of thing. Like we're just not talking about the real things that are happening to people.
so that being said, bringing it back to, I guess, where do we go now? Right now, Marit Stiles is going to stay on as
Yep.
the
Yeah,
leader of
she
the
won't go
opposition,
anywhere.
and I don't see any reason why she would leave. Like you got it, keep it, good for you. The question now is Bonnie Crombie. Like realistically, can she stay on as leader? Is there a way for her to
Well,
be
I
the
touched on this a little bit earlier, right? Like to me, the
yeah?
two things are, if you're going to make the case that she should stay on, which is not a case I would make, but if you're going to make that case, two things have to happen. One, she has to put in a lot of work to improve herself as a candidate, because I don't think she did that in between becoming leader and running in this election. You can talk about the snap vote, blah, 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 but she did have over a year to actually get ready. The second part is her team. Who are we keeping? Who are we not? There was some really bad work done on things like candidate nominations, as we've talked about. There was some strategic misfires on messaging. Like, how are we adjusting that team? You don't necessarily have to can anybody or anybody, but like, where is the interest in changing and learning from this experience? And if that doesn't exist, then throw it all out. You actually have to be willing to learn from your mistakes in a campaign. So the two examples I like to talk about are Dalton McGuinty in 1999. He did an interview with David Hurley about what he took away from that campaign and how he thought, I really need to get serious on some key policy issues and get really in the weeds and learn about where I stand on it. And then I need to put a team in place that can actually get me there. And then the other example is Kathleen Wynne after winning the leadership in 2013. She immediately went into 5 by-elections that summer. I think she won 2. John Fraser was one of them. The other ones went really, really poorly, and we lost seats that we had had forever. How did she respond to that? She completely changed her team. She honed in on her messaging and ended up winning a surprise majority afterwards. So to me, you know, I'm not convinced that Bonnie should stay, but what I would have to see for her to stay and for anyone making those arguments is that there's a willingness to admit mistakes, to learn from them, and to put in the work to grow from them. So unless that is the case, like there is just no point. But if they can do that, if they can make that argument, there are a lot of people who actually are really open to the idea of maybe we invest 2 elections in a leader and stop canning people and starting from scratch every time, because you end up losing 2 years through a leadership race. And then, there's
Mhm.
all these different issues that come from that. So maybe we just keep our investment and build on it. And I think that's the argument they will make, but they have to show how they will be seriously doing
Can
it.
I? But here, my look at this is, what if it's the opposite? What if the opposite is the thing holding back the Liberal Party is Bonnie Crombie?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking and saying, who who in Ontario cares what Bonnie Crombie has to say right now?
No one.
Well,
So
that's just it. Like
I will say, like, my thing is like, there are some metrics post election when you lose, even when you win. Like, I don't think any of the campaigns met their mission during this election. Like Doug Ford wanted a super majority and all these things. Like he didn't get
Mhm.
anywhere he wanted to. The Green Party didn't get a third seat. The NDP is still official opposition, but severely reduced in votes.
Mhm.
And we know what happened with the Liberals. So I think post-election, the things that you have to look at, because you got to change something. And you have to learn something. So you look at, do we need to tweak the plan, i.e., the policies that we put forward? Like, is there something that was missing there, something that people just didn't like, whatever? Um, do we tweak the team? Do we need different people in place here to get better results? do we tweak our ground game? Is there something we did wrong on the ground that just didn't deliver? Do we get rid of the leader? Like that is one of the options. And I think that's the one people normally go to first, because it's the very obvious showy one that you can do. And, in my opinion, that's probably what needs to happen here. But there are a lot of different fronts where you can be doing that, and all the parties need to be thinking about that going forward, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what's going to happen the next 4 years.
So I guess my question for you is like, we know, at the federal level, part of the reason why Justin Trudeau was able to hold on so long was that there was no mechanism to remove him. That's
Mhm.
not the case in Ontario. There is, I think it's Section 9 of the Constitution under leadership. There is a section about automatic leadership reviews that the Crombie campaign team during the last AGM were trying to tweak so that she wouldn't have to face one. But as it's written right now in the Constitution, she will have to face one within 2 years. Now, if I'm them and I want her to stay on and I want to stay on, I try and drag that out as long as possible so people kind of forget about it and go, okay, fine, let's just build up this campaign. I don't know that she has that luxury. I think a lot of voters in the party will push for that review to happen this year, given we're still on the
Right.
last day of
Right.
February here. There's lots of time in this year to go do that review. And I don't know that she survives that. So that's the other part of the conversation is it may not be her choice.
Well, I don't think it'll be her choice. I just don't. She was resoundingly rejected by the people of Ontario, even the people by Mississauga, the people that we thought, like the Ontario, the party, thought were going to at least they'll vote for her. Like Mississauga, we thought they got to like her. She was the mayor.
Yep.
They resoundingly rejected her, and like not, there's no quibble there. It's like no, we don't want you here. And I'm just wondering, like, that's kind of what I want to bring with the base question was like, where's that base now? Like, who is going to Bonnie and saying, I want your opinion on this. What's the direction that Ontario should be going on this? Like, I question like, even if she does stay on for 4 years, in 4 years, what does she bring to the table? Because based on her work that she's done so far, my thoughts are this: she's going to disappear for 4 years. She's going to go off and wander the wilderness of Ontario, leaving John Fraser to be asking questions in the legislature.
That it's a good point because I'm like, oh, John's gonna have to do this for a third time, isn't he? I hope they let someone else do it. But
Okay, I'm
yeah,
saying, but like, my
but
point
even
being
with
somebody
Bonnie,
else.
like to your point, like she says she's staying on, but like, does she actually want to do this? Because when all the people who she's known forever in the party since she was a young liberal who convinced her to run in the first place, they told her this was going to be a cakewalk. And she has said that in interviews, which
Right.
we can talk about whether that should have ever been said publicly.
No.
But she has said that in interviews, and that was the general sense that she was going to cakewalk. And then she thought, okay, this might be a little bit harder, but we're still going to do it. So I think she was sold a bit of a bill of goods. Whether she should have known better or not is a different question. But she came here under the understanding that she was just going to be an instant premier, basically. So
Right.
does she actually want to sit here for 4 more years and do the tough work of rebuilding a party? I don't actually know. Like somebody like Stephen Del Duca, who's a party guy through and through and loves the internal mechanization of all of that. Like, yeah, he definitely wanted to do that stuff. I don't know that Bonnie is the same type of person. And you do need somebody who's going to be willing to do that for the next pile of years.
Well, the other question is, she's going to pull 180K salary out of the party coffers, which should be going into party rebuilding
Yeah.
and paying for staff,
And
as
to
you
be
said.
clear, the fundraising that she was able to do during this period, that will take a huge nosedive. It always does after the election. It's the worst period
Yeah.
that you have. But also, people, whoever she was able to convince to donate to her, I think they will be less convinced after this loss, and that will take a
Right.
big hit too. So the one big, thing that she did as leader, which was bringing a pile of money, that's going to take a dip.
Well, absolutely. And again, but the fundraising leading up was like, okay, I'm gonna build momentum in the party. So even if she gets to official opposition, okay, people give her a second thought. She's still the third place party,
Yep.
and she lost her seat. Like I'm like, why would anybody donate to her as the leader? Like what excitement is there there?
The only
And
thing she can hope for, to your point, is that most people see the NDP as not ever going to win, so therefore the Liberals have to be the
okay,
alternative. And
But that,
perhaps Doug Ford goes and runs federally, and then it's against, Stephen Lecce or somebody, and maybe she does better there. But that's a lot of ifs and buts,
well,
like
that, but that's just it. And I'm wondering, like, she did not step up previously prior to this election. She was miss. People were saying, "Where's Bonnie?
yeah.
We don't know where she is." She says she's not running because she has to go talk to people, but
Now
she's
there is an element of that of like people don't necessarily notice what's going on, and like even me, somebody who pays a lot of attention, sometimes it's hard to see things. Stephen Del Duca, for example, had a lot of media coverage, and people also said the same thing about him of like, where's Stephen? He was constantly in the news, but people don't necessarily see that. So I will make that one caveat. But at the same time, I think they were largely invisible before the
I
campaign.
don't think it matters. I think if you're
Well, again, that's the thing, right? Like perception matters more than reality.
right, and I don't care what the excuses are. Yeah, you're the third place party and whatnot, but you've got to go and find a way to
It's
get
it's
people to.
very similar to communications where you can do the best comms of your life, but if people don't react well to it, don't notice it's happening, like it doesn't actually matter. You have not been
Right.
successful.
And so that's what I wonder is, are you willing, is she willing to do this for 4 years? Like she has to be out there. And the question say is, you need to find a by-election to win. If
Yeah,
you're going to be the
so
leader,
I
you
will
need
say
to,
this time around, she absolutely has to run in the next by-election no matter what. Like I don't like Mississauga soundly rejected her in her local riding, so
right.
that's not even an issue anymore. And the fact that she could not win during the general means she does have to show she can win in between these two elections if she's going to stay on.
But
Which again was for John Tory, ultimately what killed him.
well, that's just it. And I don't think you can ask somebody who won their seat, a liberal who won their seat already,
Yeah.
ask them, can you step aside so I can run? I think is disingenuous. I think like
Yeah.
that person won handedly. They did the work. They earned the seat. They get it. I don't know where else in this province she would have a shot of legitimately running and winning. Um, I
The only
even
place I could think of in terms of existing seats would be Etobicoke Lakeshore, and I absolutely don't think Lee should step down to do that.
No, I don't think anyone should step down. Everyone who's in there now won their seats handily. They worked hard. They got
On
it
their own, quite frankly.
right. So if I was told you're stepping down, I think
I'd
fuck
say
you.
you're not the leader then.
Well, I'm like, then guess what? We're having that review tomorrow,
Yeah.
or whatnot. Like, that's just I don't know.
Yeah. So in terms of like
My thoughts. I was just gonna say this is my final thought because we're getting up on time. I just think this is she running the risk of doing permanent damage to the liberal brand if she stays on? Because I think that the knives are coming out. She did not deliver what she promised on the leadership race. Every caucus member right now got there on their own accord. They got there because of their own hard work, their own fundraising, and their own messaging to their local
yeah.
constituents. Um,
I will say
like,
I
could she do
don't
damage?
think there is such thing as permanent damage to the liberal brand in that it proves to be extremely resilient. It always bounces back when an unpopular leader leaves. It's at its height when there is no leader. So I think the liberal
Mm.
brand is like a very strong thing. So I don't think she will do permanent damage. The question is, will she waste 4 years? And after three big election losses and, all this time afford, like, I don't think we can afford that. I don't think the province can afford that. And I think, if we're going to actually see something better happen in this province, like I don't know in what world Bonnie is the person to deliver that after this election. And I think you've sort of been talking about like what's the runway going forward? How does that happen? And I don't see a path.
All right. I'm gonna call it quits because I think we could go on for
We could.
days on this. But I appreciate the insight here. And I mean, we're recording this on the Friday morning right after the election, so this will come out on Tuesday. Lord knows what might happen between now and then. So this might all be for naught if somebody resigns or there's a pressure or whatever. So we'll keep an eye on this. But thank you very much, Theresa, for your insight. All the best, and we'll see what happens in the next 4 years.
Of course, should be exciting.